bona fide beats. Heavy hit splits, wild file style, freak flows fast, close chord dial, make links slate at the 8 pass, make more papes, too tired, crash, self-serve cake, all night nag, hurry.
Welcome everybody back to the Deep Water Podcast, and today what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and answer a question that was posed to us in the last episode, and we're going to go ahead and throw that back up on the screen right now because this is something that we've debated ourselves. So a shout out to Moya TV for this question. Does anybody have an opinion on grabbing Cam Newton? You know he's got a chip on his shoulder about what happened in Carolina and would love to prove that they messed up. What do y'all think? And you can see that we decided that we would have no issue whatsoever with taking Cam Newton on a 1-year prove-it deal. So what we want to do is we want to frame the context around why we responded in that way and why we believe that Miami should not only look into Cam Newton, but also maybe take a look into Jameis Winston. But what we're going to do is we're going to start with Cam Newton. But before that, we're going to explain why we feel the way that we feel. Because context is important, right? You can't just take an isolated statement without context and truly understand what someone means when they say it. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with what the NFL gives you and what you get in any particular year when it comes to the draft. Because signing free agents is also about the draft. Because you try to fix whatever holes you can fix with proven guys, and then you draft to develop and for the future. Okay? So on any given season, every NFL team gets 1 pick in each of the 7 rounds. And then 32 additional picks are given out as compensatory selections to the teams that qualify for those compensatory selections. So in any given season, you get 1 first-round pick, 1 second-round pick, 1 third-round pick, 1 fourth-round pick, so on and so forth. And what Miami finds themselves in this season due to the trades of Laramie Tunsil, Minkah Fitzpatrick, and others, what Miami has can be considered an embarrassment of riches, particularly in this draft, which is so deep, because instead of having 3 picks in the first 3 rounds, Miami has 6 picks in the first 3 rounds. So when you have an opportunity like that to get 6 players on the top end of the draft, when you would normally get 3 players on the top end of the draft, I think you have to make those selections and build your football team. Because what ends up happening is teams overvalue the quarterback position, and then they feel like they're pressed to get a quarterback. So now you're trading away assets to get a quarterback when you're more than 1 player away from contending for a Super Bowl. Because don't think that Miami's going to sign a quarterback right now or draft a quarterback right now, and that move is going to make them a Super Bowl contender. Because the reality is, regardless of the wolf ticket that Roger Goodell and his competition committee wants to sell you, quarterbacks do not win and lose football games. Somebody has to stop the other team from scoring. Now, keep in mind, not only do Miami have 6 picks in the first 3 rounds, they got a grand total of 14 picks. And because of the Laramie Tunsil trade, they're also going to have 2 first-round picks next season. And are you paying attention to what's going on in Houston? Bill O'Brien may mess around and give Miami a top 5 selection next season. And if something, God forbid, happens to Deshaun Watson, that could turn into the number 1 overall pick next season. So why not build your team first before you draft a quarterback and your team isn't ready? Haven't we been down that road before? So let's take a look at Cam Newton. In 2018, Cam Newton was playing his best football. At the end of week 7, Cam had a 94.2 quarterback rating with 11 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. And in that game, he actually tweaked his shoulder in a comeback victory against Philadelphia. Because as a matter of fact, in the next week's game, he sat out a Hail Mary pass. What happened after that? As we go through 11 games, Cam Newton had a 103.9 quarterback rating, 22 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. And you'll say, Well, Cam wasn't exactly making a lot of pass attempts in those games. Cam averaged 33 pass attempts in those games and was completing 69.9% or 70% of his passes. How good is that? A lot of you people who still believed in Ryan Tannehill got comeback player of the year off 22 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. And Derrick Henry rushing for 200 yards a game. Cam Newton didn't have anybody rushing for 200 yards a game. As a matter of fact, for you folks who want to suggest that it was Christian McCaffrey rushed for 1,000 yards the entire season. Okay? Now, you're talking about an 11-game window when arguably you could definitely say Cam was outplaying Ryan Tannehill. So what happened? Cam got hurt. It's that simple. He tweaked his shoulder in the Philadelphia game. The very next game, he set out a Hail Mary pass. And in a game against Pittsburgh is when his shoulder really got injured. And I'm going to put a link to the timeline of Cam Newton's shoulder injury, where you can see that the Carolina Panthers clearly should have shut Cam Newton down instead of continuing to play Cam Newton. Because the reality is sometimes you have to protect the player from themselves. Because 9 times out of 10, if you ask a player if they're okay to play on Sundays, they're going to tell you yes. And if you go back and you look at those games, something was clearly wrong with Cam's shoulder. And going into the next season, which was last season, you can clearly see that trying to compensate for that shoulder, his foot injury happened. So Cam was never really sat down to allow him to properly heal. And I know you folks are going to debate and you're going to disagree. But where Miami sits, Miami has a luxury right now that very few teams have ever had. The reality is, you could say, well, the Raiders just had 3 first-round picks last year. And they got 2 next year, just like Miami. Well, no, that's not the entire story. The entire story is Miami also led the league in cap space this offseason. And they've already put in a lot of work building this football team. And what I don't want to see is another Ryan Tannehill situation where you reach for one of these quarterbacks before the team is ready. Okay? You have 2 first-round picks next year, and the decisions that Bill O'Brien is making will likely mean you'll get a top 10, top 5, or maybe even a number 1 pick next season. Do not fool yourself. Go back to that 2018 season and look at Cam Newton's first 11 games. And then you come back and we're willing to debate this. So yes, we would absolutely take a flyer on a motivated, healthy Cam Newton. And he's not going to cost you a whole lot of money. So why not make that move? Why not even look into a young player like Jameis Winston? Because Jameis is young. Jameis does not have the injury history, but Jameis turns the football over and Cam doesn't. That's why we would say, why not look into Jameis? But if it were our choice, we would go ahead and take a flyer on Cam Newton. So thanks for the question, Moya TV, and keep them coming and we'll keep trying to respond to them. We're going to move on to another question from another viewer. This question comes from Dwayne Wood. And Dwayne asks, is Baker going to have to transition to strong safety in some sub packages to get playing time? What role do you see Sam Eguavoen playing on this team? We think that is an outstanding question. And we also think the answer to that question was actually given by Patrick Graham last season when he was asked about the defense. And he said, typically, they don't see positions in the traditional 4-3, 3-4 defensive sense. They see football players in X's and O's. And this was exactly what they were trying to sell Minkah Fitzpatrick on. So with a player like Jerome Baker, what that could look like is because Jerome is a coverage linebacker. He's not a downhill linebacker. You don't want Jerome Baker taking on offensive linemen for 16 games. It's not going to work out for you. But what he can do is he can line up next to a box safety in the defense. The safety can come downhill and he can drop back and assume that strong safety responsibility. And what that does is it creates confusion on tape. And you remember some quarterbacks saying that they're seeing ghosts on the field in that type of a defense because it's positionless and it's amorphous, and it's exactly what Brian Flores wants. And what we're going to do is we want to go ahead and try to do a little film study about that before training camp and definitely before the season to try to see if we can explain it to you guys. All right. The other part of that question is about Sam Eguavoen. Sam Eguavoen finally got some playing time in the NFL, and I see him more as a developmental prospect. Is he good? Is he bad? I don't think it's fair to him to draw that conclusion right now, but he got some valuable experience in the NFL coming from another football league. Okay. So right now I see a special teams player and a depth player out of Sam Eguavoen, but he's willing to stick his nose in there. He just was not used to dealing with NFL level offensive linemen, and you could see it in his play. His hand placement is off. He doesn't know how to use leverage, and he isn't the biggest guy in the world, but he's athletic, and athletic linebackers fit in this defense. So thank you guys for listening. We're going to move on. We may answer one or two more questions before we drop this episode about the defensive backs and move on to the draft. So stay tuned for the next episode of the Deepwater Podcast.
We got keys to the underground. Shimty, Killer Hurt, this for you. About to get sick with it. Exclusive, people. As quick as I can spit it, I'm sick with it. Survivor, you and yours. Riders, born pieces of shit, flip scripts just to get rich. In this rap world, I murder everything except track, y'all whack. A matter of fact, you never seen dead bodies, the aftermath of what I just did with my army. Deep with heat, lurking the outskirts, politic with government.